Awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen right here, so I hope everyone can see. So I'm really happy to be here today. Sorry, just going to set up my timer so I know I'm not going over time. My name is Hema, and I'll be giving you guys a short-ish workshop on some insights as to the world of user experience and user interface design. Before I get started, I just want to make sure everyone's comfortable. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts, feel free to put them in the chat while I'm talking. If you have any burning questions, write them down. We can wait till the end. There's going to be a Q&A. Please just, if you're ever interested in knowing more about something, feel free to ask. So I wanted to do a quick check. You could put in the chat and, I'll be able to take a look. Where are you guys from? Are you in high school, university, looking for a job? Where are you, what are you hoping to get out of this? Just interested. So I'm gonna get started with the agenda, our table of contents. We're going to go over a quick introduction of myself. Then I'm going to describe to you guys so you all will know by the end of this the difference between UX and UI, first broadly speaking, and then we're going to go a lot deeper into it. Then I'll go over why the world needs UX now, UX in the workplace, and then a quick Q&A at the end. So as I mentioned, feel free to write all your questions in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask. So don't be shy. So first, a quick introduction to myself and why you should be listening to me at all. So as I mentioned, my name is Hema. I actually studied mechanical engineering at U of T, University of Toronto. And after I graduated, I worked as a management operational consultant. So vastly different from user experience, a whole different world. So I worked as a consultant for about a year and a half before I realized that I wanted to be a little bit more people focused. It wasn't driving me as much as I wanted my work to. So then I started to look around to see what industries really focus on people, and UX popped up. So I did a lot of self-study. I tried to identify what skills I have that could be useful in this new industry. I did a boot camp. I started a small freelance business on Fiverr. And just recently, I scored a job as a user experience design with Maropost, a digital company. So after a lot of work and a lot of industries and a lot of dedication, I'm here. So you might be asking, why should you be listening to me? Well, I do have maybe not as much experience just in user experience and user interface, but I have a breadth of experience in the realms around it. And you'll see what I mean by that as we continue this presentation. So we're going to dive into what user experience design and what user interface design is. First off, let me mention that user experience design is really blowing up recently because many companies are looking to create a digital presence. And that is where user experience is necessary to develop strong following and loyal customers. But UX is not something that is only accomplished for digital products. So take a look here at this picture. Have any of you guys ever had the experience where, you wanted to cross the street at a very particular place because it was convenient? Maybe it was right outside your door. Maybe it was the pizza place across the street is right there, but there's no stop sign. There's no traffic light. There's no way for you to actually get across the road. Are you going to walk all the way to the next stoplight? No, you're probably going to jaywalk. The current traffic lights are not serving your purpose. So that's kind of an example. A similar example to this photo where UX on the road is not actually helping you in your situation. So this picture right here is an example of how you can take user experience practices and use it into something that's more physical and real, as you can see, this park. While the term user experience is fairly new, there's older terms such as human factors, which already gives us a fairly strong base to create better user experiences today. So what's happening here is, some designer decided they'd make a nice square pathway through this park. It would look beautiful. They got it paved, they got lights, they got trees, they put grass in the places where people were not supposed to walk. And then after a few weeks of usage, what do we see here? We see this gross, muddy trail. And you know why? It's because this pathway was not providing the people the user experience that they wanted. They wanted to probably get from over here to these houses that are over there. Now, is it faster if they just cut across this grass rather than, take these two side pathways? Yes. And so that led to this path just being totally unused, and with all the users instead creating their own pathway. So this is just an example for everyone here to kind of understand that user experience isn't just what's going on in the tech world. It can be related to things in your real life. So now, user experience is a very vast industry, and it encompasses many, many disciplines. Now, I'm not showing this picture right here to scare you, but instead to inspire you. So user experience is a very young field, and it's also rapidly changing and including new and interesting industries. It also means that people who study different things in post-secondary are equipped to contribute to the user experience world. For example, we see here, industrial design, human factors and ergonomics, architecture, marketing, computer science, communication, mechanical, electrical engineering. Like, these are all different ways that you can get into the UX world, because a lot of these industries are related to the user experience circle. So now we are going to dive into the specifics of user experience, UX, and user interface, UI, into technical terms, if you will. This section will help you get a bit of an understanding as to, what a UX and UI designer might be working on in an industry or at a job. So first, user experience. It encompasses all aspects of an end user's interaction with a particular company, its services, and its products. So if you're a user experience designer, you'll be following some sort of process or methodology that will help you create a good user experience for your product. So I'm going to show you a methodology or process that you might follow when designing a new product as a user experience designer. So the first step is to empathize. So you need to understand for your product or service that you're creating, who is your target audience? Who is your demographic that is being served? Then you learn a little bit more about the current problems and frustrations for that demographic, and you empathize with those. Now, to be able to empathize, you will need to do a lot of research, which is honestly its own UX discipline, but a lot of user experience designers also have to do that. So you can go out and you can conduct surveys, interviews, observations, focus groups. You can get information from all of these different places to help you understand what the most biggest and problematic areas are within your demographic. So this would likely be around the time when you create a persona or an experience map. And now for those of you who don't really know what that is, let's dig a little further into it. So this is an example of a persona. Personas are small, paper-sized examples of who your target audience is. They're people that you basically create them. So they're created based off of the goals, the frustrations, and the motivations of the people that will use your product or service. So they're all the people that you interviewed, you surveyed, you talked to. They all will compile together into this persona. Now, they aren't a real person. John Doe doesn't actually exist, but they are parts of all of these people that you researched. And at the end of the day, they are a tool for you and your team. Now, this tool is to help the entire team actually empathize for the people that they're designing for. It keeps the entire team, not just designers, focused on who they're trying to help and how they're trying to solve the problem. So as you see over here in a persona, now this does change based on the company that you're working at, but you'll have a photo, some sort of a name, a quote to help give a little bit of life to the person or the people that you're trying to kind of include. You'll have a little bio, some demographic information, which is very important because you really want to focus deeply on a specific demographic. The most important part here is the needs of this person or this group of people and the frustrations right here. And then here is just some extra information for the people on the team to be able to understand, okay, this person uses Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat. They enjoy social media. So if we include functionalities like social media, they'll know how to use it. So these all together will kind of help you understand who you need to design for. And at every part of the process, you always want to look back and see, can John Doe use my product? Will it help him? So it's your guiding light, one could say. Next is the experience map. Now, experience maps are built upon personas, and they showcase your persona's typical current experience. So it's basically a useful way to map out what a person is going through currently and see where there's potential for a digital product or service. So in this case, this was from a project that I was working on, and it was for a person who was struggling to figure out what they wanted to do in post-secondary after high school. So as you can see over here, I created a little bit of a graph showing how my persona was feeling as they were going through the process of trying to identify what to do after high school. Now, the areas that are most important to a designer are normally the ones that are the lowest on this graph. And that's because you're able to identify that this is where your people, the people that you want to use your product, this is where they feel the most worried or desperate or afraid or scared. And that's when they're more likely to reach out and actually accept digital intervention. So once you identify who it is that you're actually designing for, the next step is to define. So you basically define all of your problem space. You want to make sure that you know who it is that you're creating for and what their problem actually is. So when you do your research, it's actually very easy to observe many problems, and you want to solve them all, but you can't. So it's really important to define your problem space. You need to define what is the issue that if you alleviate it will make the biggest difference to your demographic. Then you use that as your guiding light throughout the rest of the process. For example, if we're looking at the project that I was doing to help students in high school figure out what they want to do in post-secondary, there's lots of issues there. Maybe they can't organize all of their research. Maybe they have trouble finding research. Maybe they just don't have any guidance in what to do and how to go about it. These are all different problems and they'll all require different solutions. It's very important to choose the problem that you feel like is the biggest and will have the most impact, and then work towards fixing that. The next part of the process is to ideate. So based on whatever your problem you have, whatever problem you figured out, it's time to try to think of different functionalities that will solve that problem. So, a quick example, a different one now. Let's say you've chosen a demographic of young adults in the city. You've chosen a problem space of finding accessible healthcare. A functionality, potentially, that you can think of is to create a directory of doctors within the city and provide a filter. So the person can filter based on location, specialty, insurance coverage, yada, yada. So at this point, it's more solution driven. You're trying to think of what are the things that, a digital solution can bring to this person that will help solve their problem. Now, you won't just come up with one idea. You'll come up with dozens and dozens of ideas that will solve this problem. It's important to keep it simple. It's important to, not go too crazy and too out of the box, but you will have lots of things at this point and you will want to try lots of different things. So it's primarily then up to you and your team to identify, okay, we have all these different solutions on how we can fix these problems. Which ones have we seen work the best in the past? Which ones do we want to give a shot to? And then once you kind of identify which solutions you want to try, it's time for prototyping. So now with prototyping, there are so many different stages to this. I don't want to get too into the weeds, but let me show you a quick graphic of kind of what it looks like. So here's an example of what prototyping might look like in the 3 different stages. You'd first start off by looking at competitors and seeing what layouts do or don't work. Honestly, you might not have heard this before, but looking at what other people have done and quote unquote copying it or taking it is actually a very important part of user experience, user interface design, in the sense that what someone else has used, if it works, why not use it in your own design, as long as you're not copying every single thing. So that's just something to keep in mind. You don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So the first step in prototyping is to sketch your designs out, sketch your ideas onto paper. So the sketches don't need to have words. They can literally just have lines, just like this one. It's just a rough setup of what the screen might look like. You might go through a few iterations of sketches with your team before moving on to the next stage. And that is mid-fidelity prototyping. That's when you start putting a little bit more information on the page. Instead of sketching, you're most likely going to develop these screens with some sort of a design software. However, everything will still be in shades of gray. You're still going to use representations of things rather than actual pictures and text. And this specific, fidelity will probably be used for some sort of testing to see if users can actually make sense of what they see and that they can actually use it. The last step of prototyping is high fidelity. And this is where UI designers get to do most of their work. Here is where you add brand and functional colors. You add photos, you add transitions to your design. So if someone is viewing it, they're able to see what it would actually feel like to use. At this point, you'd be showing your design to stakeholders within and outside of your company to get more buy-in, to get people excited. People love seeing beautiful pictures and colors, but you don't want to jump the gun. You definitely want to make sure while you're in this gray area over here that your design can actually be used before putting all the effort into making it super fun and colorful. And then, of course, the last part of the process is testing. Now, I know testing is at the end of the process, but it doesn't just happen after you finish prototyping. In fact, this is honestly probably what testing actually looks like, especially, if there's already a product or service that you're working within. The key is, always talk to people, always talk to your users, test, get more and more data back from them. It's always better to design quickly and test early. That is what you'll hear throughout the industry, absolutely everywhere. So that's just a little bit of a taste of what user experience design is. It is a vast bucket, but it's basically someone who goes through this entire process to understand through research what is an issue, build some ideas and functionality, and then put that functionality into some sort of a digital screen so it can be tested. Now, what you might have noticed is that when I went through prototyping, there was that stage where, user interface design became very important. So now let's dig a little bit deeper into what a user interface designer might be involved with. Now, just a little bit of a heads up, user interface design is typically just like a subset of UX design. So another example of that would be user experience researcher. I'll get a little bit deeper into that as we continue, but first let's go through what user interface is. So it focuses more on elements that the user actually interacts with. And so a lot of people that actually get into UI design, they come from a design background, so some sort of art school or something like that. In large companies, there might be a dedicated user interface designer that will take the mid-fidelity wireframes or designs that we saw and turn them into high-fidelity stuff before handing them off to the development team. As I mentioned, it's basically a subset of UX. Like a UX researcher might be connecting with, a UX wireframer who's then connecting to a UI designer. And all of these three people would be doing that one process that we saw as user experience. So it really depends on the company, what you would be doing when you get there. But again, this is just an overview. So the field of user interface is actually almost as vast as user experience, but there are just a few things that I believe are quite important for everyone here to kind of understand as an intro as to what UI is actually all about. So the first thing is accessibility. So designs are getting more and more inclusive as we design for accessibility. It's governed by a place called the W3C Accessibility Guidelines. And so companies in Canada are actually working to make their online products much more accessible to those with physical disabilities. These can cover anything from limited vision to loss of limbs for necessity to screen readers. Basically, if you want to design for your largest demographic, you want to make sure your designs can be used by absolutely everybody. So here's an example of, accessibility in design, and it's actually color contrast. So I'm so sorry that this picture is, fairly bad quality, but you can kind of see what's going on. Contrast is basically a number that is calculated to be the difference between some text and then some background. So as we can see over here, you can hardly even see what this text is saying. And even here, you can kind of see it. It's not so bad, but still not great. But here you can see, a nice like white on black, a nice dark blue and a light blue. And as you can see, the contrast ratios here are quite high. And what that's basically showing you is, according to the Web Accessibility Guidelines, you need to have a contrast ratio of over 4.5 to be at the level of accessible that places need you to be. So basically, it's just a thing to keep on the lookout for. If you look at beautiful designs online, in a lot of cases, you'll see, a beautiful light yellow with a white on top of it. And as nice as it looks, it's actually not accessible. And people with low vision or limited vision will not be able to see it. So this sort of consideration really needs to be taken for all these people to be able to actually use your application. Similarly, and another important thing is spacing and sizing. So they're basically best practices on how large buttons need to be, how far away they need to be spaced from each other. One convention is providing the user with at least 44 pixels of clickable space for one particular button, no matter how large the button is. So as you can see over here, we have like all of these different buttons are all very close together. You don't have 44 pixels of space. Over here, this is where you do. You see here this really small, tiny button. It might be hard for someone to press, if they only are using one hand, if they're rushed, if they're busy, like there's all these considerations. And that's why making larger buttons, especially when you want them to click the button, making larger buttons is more ideal. So again, this sort of design consideration is useful for people who have difficulty with motor skills or just, are in a situation where they're not able to very closely see what's on the screen. So another very important consideration for creating user interface or UI is to reduce the confusion of how the app actually works. So what sort of functionality your product can serve and how to go about actually getting that functionality to work. So I've read it over here, things that look the same, act the same. That's one thing that you want to make sure you don't fall into. Now we have our example right here. The image on the left, we have 3 different buttons. They all do different things, login, sign up, and forgot password, but they all look exactly the same with the same gradient, the same size. So what ends up happening is that your user will have to kind of calculate a mental load of understanding, okay, I see all these 3 buttons. What do they actually do? They have to take the extra second to be like, they all do different things. On this side, you can see these 3 buttons still exist, but they all look different. You have a gradient here, you don't have anything here, and you have, absolutely no lines on the bottom. And this way a user is able to differentiate, these buttons all do different things. Not only can I see they have different text, but they visually look the same. So I can quickly make that connection. So again, it's very important to make sure that if something functions the same, it's okay if they look the same. But if they don't, you might want to consider making them look different. And now another important consideration is to add delight. So I know that might sound a little silly, but let's be real. When users use products or services that make them smile, it provides moments of joy and it basically gets them to return. It causes good feelings. And so because it improves their experience, it's really important to design for. So here's just a few examples of what might be considered surprise or delightful design. Things moving like little animations. You have this little rocket that's going up while you're searching on Yelp. And you have like these weird ape animations as well. It's all about kind of doing things that people don't expect, but in like a fun way. So now the big question is, how are you going to start your UX journey? So what we just covered were the basics of what user experience is and what user interface is within user experience. But just having that knowledge isn't necessarily enough as to understanding whether or not you want to pursue a path in user experience. So let's say all of you guys have started thinking about becoming a UX or UI designer, and you're not sure if you should get into it. So here's a few questions that I urge that you ask yourself. Are you willing to learn and adopt new technologies? So user experience, user interface is a very new field. And even in the last year, there have been crazy intense changes in the software and the technologies that are being used. Are you interested in learning more about people and how they use their products? So you really have to care about getting into the nitty-gritty about how people use products or services, and you use that to help you make your decisions. Now, are you an empathetic person? While you'll be using research and data to help you lead, you will also remember that users are people, and therefore they make their decisions based on their emotions. In response, you also need to consider their experiences in an emotional way. Now, do you like collaborating with people? This is something that I didn't realize. UX is not a siloed industry. You'll be working with developers, product owners, customer success, project managers, stakeholders, clients, honestly, the whole 9 yards. So you need to be able to play nice with other people. Now, do you enjoy working on your computer? So you might have the opportunity to sketch a few things out, research things with people, send surveys, but honestly, majority of your work will be at your computer. And so you have to be okay with that. And the biggest thing is, are you open to feedback? It is so important to be able to give and receive feedback as a UX or UI designer. You should never be designing anything alone. And remember that if someone tells you that you're supposed to be designing alone, that's never the case. So again, on this like journey to understanding how can you get into UX or UI, you might be wondering, how do I do it? It's not very clear cut. And because user experience or UI is honestly connected to so many different fields, there's actually many ways to get into the industry. So these are some that I've either witnessed, I've seen other people do, or I've done myself. So the first thing here is boot camps. So boot camps are short, 12, sometimes 16-week programs that give you the basics of user experience and user interface. They can teach you the basics. They can teach you kind of the first level of all of this, but they can't necessarily teach you the in-depth that you'll actually get when you work with real people on real projects. So they'll give you the language, they'll give you the tools, but you have to do a lot of work to get to the place that you need to be. Then there's also college programs. So what I found is that there are a bunch of college programs these days that are offering user experience. I haven't done one myself, but they do seem to be offering, the basics of the courses and a very hands-on approach to how to understand and get into UX. Some programs also offer co-op, which is amazingly useful. Then there's internships. So this is most likely to require self-study or moving within the company that you currently work within. Basically, it's being able to reach out and be like, hey, I'm interested in working in user experience. Will you give me a chance? You're able to cite kind of your previous experiences, and that might help you get into this industry without having to put any money down to study. But it will require you to do a lot of your own research and to learn a lot of the jargon yourself. And lastly is university. So this is actually quite a new one, but some universities are offering user experience or human-computer interaction courses or programs. So again, I haven't taken one myself, but I've definitely heard of these things. They do exist, and I'm sure they can help you get onto a path to becoming a UX or UI designer. So the biggest question that I had when I was looking into UX and UI is, how do I learn about UX? And there's so many different links. As soon as you Google, how do I become a UX designer? Or how do I learn UX? So many links. You have courses and boot camps and blogs and whatnot. It can be really overwhelming. So I wanted to put together a little bit of an action item list for those of you that maybe want to learn a little bit more about the user experience world. These are resources that really helped me determine whether or not I wanted to pursue UX. It's normally a good idea to do a lot of research before getting into anything like very seriously. So Coursera, let me tell you everyone, Coursera is a lifesaver. These are some courses that I took on Coursera for free, just so I could get my feet wet and learn some of the words that use like UX to understand the basics. The first one that I did was UI/UX design specialization from CalArts, because as an engineering student by nature, I wasn't sure if I'd be interested in the design aspect of the job, so I wanted to get some insight. I've also heard a lot of good things about the Google UX Design Professional Certificate, but I haven't personally done it. It has a lot of people that have done it and high ratings, so I feel like it's as good as any. And the last one on the list is Introduction to User Experience Design by Georgia Tech. So this is just a course, not a full specialization, so you can very easily get through it and not very long to just understand if user experience is something that you want to get into. One thing that I urge you to remember is that once you do any of these courses, you're not suddenly a UX expert. You've had an introduction, but you will need a lot more learning to be actually considered hireable. So just remember, don't be disheartened, just be humble. Oh, I'm so sorry. Those were all links. And so I just clicked one of them. There we go. All right. Okay, here we go. So blogs to read. I found that reading blog articles about all these things on Coursera was really, really beneficial. You know, I'd get a deeper insight on the topic. I'd be learning, I'd be getting some insight into, you know, design communities. So these are some 3 different places. I'm going to make sure not to click on them. UX Collective, UX Planet, and the Nielsen Norman Group. And they're just some examples of websites that I've read articles from. Now, it's common to, you know, read articles on the same topic from lots of different places, but you know what? UX is a vastly, vastly subjective area. So there's lots of different people that have lots of different ideas on the same things. So it's predicated on humans. You want to be able to get different ideas of what everyone thinks. So my recommendation is to go ahead and read as much as you can. See how the different people kind of use the same processes in different ways. Now, communities. In terms of design communities, they can be super, super helpful in terms of meeting people, watching more valuable talks and lectures, and participating in hackathons. So the ones that I've gotten the most benefit out of is Design Buddies, which I stumbled upon about a year ago. So they're Discord based, and if you sign up for one of their lists, they'll just send you a bunch of emails with a bunch of talks, and they have many, and they get quite specific. So if you're interested in watching more talks and getting more information from real people, I highly recommend them. Design X is a little bit newer to me, but I've heard a lot of good things. They have channels where you can see discussions from other UX designers and get some insight into their experiences. There's also a job board, but they're typically more senior UX roles, so it might not be as beneficial to people that are just starting out, but still useful to see other people's experiences. Now, this is an interesting thing that I did for a while, which is basically usability testing. I opened up a gig on Fiverr saying that I can usability test your applications. And usability testing is one section of user experience design. It is when you get somebody else to use your application, your demo, whatever you're prototyping on Figma and you want them to see if they can actually go through the application without stumbling, without messing things up, without clicking the wrong thing. So I told people that I could do that for them. I could test their applications. And it was a great way for me to see what other things exist out there. And so I highly recommend, if you have any friends that, you know, maybe are starting up companies, or if you know any small companies, see if you can help them. Go through their website. Tell them if there's something that doesn't make sense. Making or doing all of this practice is really, really beneficial, because you'll be able to hone your eye for design. If you're like, hey, you know, mom and pop coffee shop down the street, you look at their website and you're like, there's a few things here that don't make much sense. You write up a few suggestions and you tell them. And so that's a really good way for you to get some more bearings in the UX world without actually having to design anything per se. This is just a website that I found called User Testing. I've never actually used it myself, but as it says, get paid to share your perspective as global brands. It seems like a good way for you to kind of get your feet wet and understand, you know, how can someone look at the UX of something else? So I think it's a good way for people, again, unless you're, if you're not 100% sure about UX, to try to get your bearings around the area. And books to read. So I know that not everybody likes reading books, but there's a billion UX books out there. Honestly, if you look it up, you'll find them. But these are 2 books that I read before I dove further in my UX journey. I only recommend them because I read them. They're simple, but they also give you really, really good insight into why UX is important and in what ways it's important. Also, after reading specifically this book, you'll really be on the lookout for, you know, poorly designed materials a lot more. Like, for example, you've probably all seen this, but when a door is like a pull door, but the handle makes it look like it's a push door, that's just an example of poor design. So the more that you watch out for these things that are poor design, the better designer you will become. So it's not just about, you know, going online, making pretty pictures and doing all of that. It can honestly just be about being more aware and more mindful of your own life. And now, lastly, try some software. So I know SuperPOSITRON has a Figma 101 workshop. I'm fairly sure it's tomorrow. You should definitely check it out because Figma is the industry favorite. If you ever want to design or prototype anything, 100% use Figma. It's free for, you know, the free tier. You can collaborate with other people. Developers can directly take code from it, and it basically acts as not just a simple design tool, but you can build out your screens and prototype That is, make it look like this is actually a real application on the same program. So I highly recommend you sign up for an account. As I mentioned, it's free. There's a bunch of great videos on YouTube from Figma that kind of shows you how you can design these simple screens. And it's a great way for you to be able to show an employer, be like, yeah, I use Figma. I know how to use it. Not a problem. That's honestly an amazing thing for somebody to hear. So it would be very necessary, I would say, to be able to help you get a job in this field. And also to just help you understand, do you like designing things in this online software? Do you enjoy moving your mouse in these ways to build things? I don't know. You have to answer that for yourself. Now, for the end of the presentation, I just wanted to give you a little bit of insight as to what UX in the field is actually like. I know you guys are all here for the hackathon. Maybe you wanted to learn what UX is so you could implement it within your actual hackathon this weekend. But I feel like it's important, if you're at all interested in user experience or user interface design, what does it actually look like in the workplace? So first off, I want to, put the question out there. Why do companies even think about user experience or user interface? So the biggest answer here is to differentiate themselves from other companies. So many companies offer similar products today. Just think about it. Uber and Lyft, they're basically the same thing, but they look different. The differentiating factors at this point are the UX and the UI. And you want to make sure that both of those things contribute to having positive, happy, and frictionless experiences. So if your company is putting effort into making technology more usable, enjoyable, accessible, you'll be able to see your usership grow and be more loyal. That is why so many companies are so much more interested in UX and UI these days. It's just something that they want to make sure they have so they gain more loyal customers. That's why it makes everyone who becomes a UX or UI designer very valuable, because they will directly add to the people that are using this product. It is just like a value add, 100%. So I would say it's a fairly good industry to get into, because I don't think it's leaving anytime soon. Now, I just wanted to show you a few examples of companies that showcase good UX in specific areas. So you can learn a lot from existing companies and the ways that they do things just by kind of paying a little bit more attention as you're using them. So for example, Airbnb has a fantastic user interface with an easy search tool at the top. And it really contributes to its stellar UX by personalized recommendations. And then you have Apple. The brand itself is synonymous with luxury, but they've also developed a very clean and minimalist layout, as you can see, like literally right there. And that lends to the luxury. They've excelled in their user interface design because it is consistent with their branding and with the message that they want to send to people. And then you have Amazon. So we all might have problems with Amazon. Yes, I agree. And they do actually have a ton of user experience issues, but they do create a very strong user experience process while shopping, because you have personalized shopping suggestions. You have buttons that make shopping easy, such as buy it again. There's lots of things that will help you actually shop. And incidentally, it makes them more money, but you know what I mean? They do it quite well. They make you comfortable to purchase things from their store. So keep a lookout for companies with UX that you enjoy and even UX that you dislike. As I mentioned before, all of these understandings will just help you learn and become better. So I personally have only recently joined my workplace, but I wanted to give you a quick idea of what a day in my life or a day in the life of a UX designer would look like. So first, around 8 a.m., I'll wake up in the morning, eat some breakfast. Probably not. Most of the time I don't eat breakfast. But in the morning, the first thing that I do is meetings with developers, product managers, business analysts, all these people that are giving me information about research that they've done, or I'm giving them information about designs that I have done. So this does take quite a bit of time, and there is constant communication. So I almost have these meetings every single day. Then, from around 11 a.m., I'll be getting all my notes into order, maybe some sketches, maybe I have papers all around my desk, like maybe my Figma files are a little messy, who knows what it is. So I take a little bit of time to actually make sure that that's all ready and in order. Then around 12:30, I, have my lunch, I do some errands. you might be interested in realizing that UX is actually a very free field in a lot of cases. A lot of companies allow for remote work, and that basically helps you allow your day to be spread out the way that you want it to. So maybe I take an extra long lunch. Yeah, that's fine. But what ends up happening is I might work a little bit later in the day. So as you can see over here, around 2:30, maybe I'll start designing. I'll be designing. Oh, I'll have a team meeting. This is where I talk with other designers. That also happens almost once a day. And that's to get feedback, to critique other people, to just let everyone know, where am I in my design? Then there's more designing. Finally, you need to eat food. So I make and eat my dinner. You need to stay healthy. So I'll go for a walk. And now this question mark time, it really depends on how much time I've taken for other random things during the day. Again, UX design is very good for remote work. It helps you kind of lay out the day as the way that you want it to be. And it doesn't kind of stick you to a particular schedule in a lot of places. So just keep that in mind when you're looking for jobs, because it does allow for very free workflow. Again, not every company is like this, but a lot of them are. Now, again, something that I thought was quite important to mention, the pay that you can expect being a UX designer. The starting pay for a UX designer in Ontario is around 65 to 80K. Now, if you're someone who's had UX experience before, you might be able to negotiate a little bit more. And if you're aiming for an intern or junior level, you might start a little bit under, but I recommend that you use these numbers kind of as your guideline. Be ready with this answer if you're heading into an interview. Don't let them pay you any less than what you are worth. I'm also not sharing this with you because I want to tell you oh, you can make so much money as a UX designer. It's true, you can make money, but it's a very new field that's highly in demand, which means that any skills that are related to this field are also highly in demand. So there is scope for kind of having a more free-form life, as well as having a solid and stable salary. So again, the big thing here, don't let them pay you less than what you deserve. And now the last bit of the presentation, and that's kind of for everyone here that's interested in where can I go after becoming a user experience designer, because I'll be real with you, a user experience designer is kind of the bottom rung of a lot of companies. It's kind of where everyone starts out when they're coming into this field. Nobody, or not many people, want to be a user experience designer for their entire lives. So I'm just going to go through a few different places that you can go to after being a user experience designer for a few years. So you can just go ahead and follow this fairly straight pathway, become a senior UX designer, a design manager, a design director. By the end of this pathway, you won't be doing as much design and you'll be doing a lot more directing. You'll be doing a lot more team management, but you should still have the skills of user experience design to be able to help the people in your team be successful. Another route that you can go is freelance design. And this way you can actually do bits of everything, such as UX research, UX design, UI design for different clients in different industries at different times. So this is good for someone who wants to be very free, wants to be a jack of all trades, and to understand all the aspects of UX design from all the different industries. Sometimes getting a client base as a freelancer can be hard, but people have done it. And they normally do it first through online platforms like Upwork and TopTal. You could also just do a very deep dive into one industry or one vertical within an industry and become a subject matter expert in UX in that field, such as healthcare or manufacturing or finance. And make sure you enjoy that industry before making this choice, because as a subject matter expert, you will be highly regarded, but just for that particular industry. And another option for you is honestly just to jump around within different companies. As a UX designer, people sometimes join companies as UX researchers, UI designers, front-end developers, UX writers, interaction designers. Remember that picture that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation? All of those things, you can jump around to wherever you want if you do a little bit of self-study and gather those skills. This will be good for someone who likes developing new skills and enjoys learning, and who wants the option to be able to wear all of these hats. Lastly, we have product management, or just product in general. UX is slightly different from product because within product teams, they have more, they have to consider business implications a little bit more. If you are interested in the business side of UX, then you can definitely consider making the transition from UX designer into some sort of product team. So that is a little bit abrupt, but that is the end of the presentation. I hope that it gave you a little bit of insight into the difference between UX and UI, and also gave you a little bit of insight into what the actual field looks like. I'm opening it now to any QA, literally any question you have, I will answer as transparently as possible. You feel free to unmute yourself or just put it in the chat. So, ooh, fantastic. A few questions. Thank you, everyone. So first question, is it easier to transition to UX if you have a tech background, for example, computer science? Now, that's a very good question. And I think something that you'll face if you're from a tech background and you want to get into UX is people might actually dissuade you from it. They might be like, but tech is so much better. You can get better jobs, get paid more. I personally think it actually is easier to transition into UX if you already have a tech background, because the back end that a user experience designer is designing for. You are then able to, make your screens, design your apps, and you already have an idea of what can work or cannot work, which honestly, myself included, a lot of UX designers don't know, and they have to go and have these conversations. So I definitely believe if you already have an experience in computer science, it will be easy for you to transition to UX. But something that you need to kind of be aware of is that people might not be as excited for you to do that, because sometimes people do look down at UX in general because it's not as technical, but I definitely think you can do it. Another question, can I do UX UI for fun without any experience? So it really depends on what you mean for fun. So if you're just kind of interested in maybe creating your own website or your own products or something like that, then yeah, for sure, you can look up a few things online and do it without any experience. Do it for yourself, for your friends, or for your family. If you're not looking to do it as a job, as a livelihood, then you definitely don't need any experience to get into all of this stuff. And I highly recommend doing it for fun, because it is very fun to be able to come up with a solution and actually build it and then show people, even if it doesn't actually do anything and it's not actually connected to anything. All right, we have another question. How did your undergrad experience prep you for your career? So I think my answer will be a little different from a lot of people, because a lot of people that I know do have a design or art background that get into user experience, but I have a mechanical engineering background. But I would say the way that my undergrad prepped me for this career is it really helped me understand how important following data or research is. That was literally half of what I did in mechanical engineering, doing research to try to understand if various things would work in various group projects. I did a lot of that. And that is basically the first quarter, I would say, of the user experience process. So it definitely prepped me just for that part of the process, but really not for anything in the rest of it. What my undergrad experience did help me with is giving me an understanding of what it is like to learn something new. In undergrad, I had to learn something new almost every week. And when I was learning user experience, it was a similar thing. I had to learn something new almost every week so that I could get to the level where I could actually get a job, even without having that background and, the background in my studies. So another question, how do you network with other UI UX designers? So I think, again, my answer will be very specific to myself, but I actually did a 12-week boot camp at BrainStation. They're I think headquartered in New York, but they have a Toronto campus. And I did a program there just so I could understand the basics of UX, UI, and get the proper wording. And so I met a bunch of designers there. And I actually, after having graduated for a while now, I still keep in touch with them, and we do help each other out on projects that the other person's doing. And that's kind of how I would suggest you create your network. maybe people that you meet at this hackathon, like you connect with them and continue to connect with them later. If you do some sort of course or join a community online, connect with these people and like don't stop bothering them, because having that network is very, very useful, not just for referring you guys to like different jobs, but also like giving you critiques on your designs, you know, helping you out as you kind of move through what it is to be a UX designer. So that's kind of how I did it. I, again, recommend the communities. I recommend some sort of courses, sometimes even just talking to people, telling your friends that you're interested in UX. They might know someone who's also interested. That's happened more times than I can count. So just be vocal about what it is that you want to do. So another question, do you think an experience in UI UX would be beneficial for an entrepreneur? So I actually do have an entrepreneur friend who decided to kind of pivot into UX UI. And I do believe that it's actually very, very useful, unless you want to, of course, reach out and outsource that kind of skill set, because for no matter what you're making, if it's a product or a service, if it's digital or not, you do need to consider user experience, because in this day and age, people have a billion different options to choose from. You want them to choose your product because of how easy it is for them to use it. So I definitely think it would be beneficial. In terms of what apps do you recommend, I think if you could just expand on what you mean by what apps I recommend you can use, and then I can hopefully answer your question, but I don't particularly understand that. Any tips on how to start a UI or UX UI portfolio? Yes. So my first tip is to just go online and buy yourself a domain, do like your first name, your last name.com, .ca, whatever it is, and just like start, like purchase that domain. Then you could work with either WordPress or Squarespace, or there's like a bunch of different things. Webflow, Semplice, go online, look at some videos on how to set that up and do it as soon as possible. Even if you feel like it's garbage on your website, it's worth it to have something out there that you can work on and iterate upon. And then, you know, every time you're struck with inspiration, you can start developing your portfolio. But the biggest things that I would say you need to have on your portfolio is, one, what differentiates you from other designers? You know, is it your passion? Is it your background? Is it some unique thing about yourself? Two, case studies from projects that you've worked on. That can be from hackathons, that could be personal projects, that could be school projects, that could be an actual project that you've worked with a client. And then three, some sort of like an about section where they can click into and read a little bit more about yourself, about your experience, your history, and what it is you're looking for in the future. So I would suggest putting those three things into your portfolio. Now, someone also asked, they're going to their last year of mechanical engineering and was wondering what was my biggest driver for choosing a different career path. Now, I'll be real, I did mechanical engineering and then I did a HVAC internship for 16 months and I hated it. It just wasn't what I was interested in. It was very bland and it wasn't very like new and exciting. So I definitely I wanted to try something different. And then I tried consulting and I also didn't like that. So it was basically just a bunch of steps of me messing up and, you know, not really knowing what it is I wanted to do. As soon as I graduated, trying something, realizing I didn't like it, and then trying to see what did I not like from that thing that I can try in my next one. So just to, I guess, clarify, in my HVAC job, I didn't like how stagnant and slow everything was. So I tried to do the opposite and go to a fast-paced and changing environment, which was consulting. But unfortunately, it was too fast-paced and changing for me. And what I really enjoyed out of it was kind of the research aspect, but that wasn't very much of the actual job. So then I focused on, okay, I like the research, I hate everything else. What is something that will provide me with the ability to do that research? And then I honestly stumbled upon user experience. So it was a pretty long journey for me to get to this place. But, you know, I wouldn't frown at anyone who decides not to do what their degree tells them to do. Like, I know a bunch of my engineering friends don't do engineering now, and that's just kind of the way of life, you know? I do have a question for the hosts. It is 9:30. Is it all right if we continue, or do we have to end? I could answer these questions on Discord as well. I would just like to know how we want to pursue the rest of this. Okay, since there's no answer there, I'll just assume that everything's right and I'll keep going. So this is a great question. Must you know how to draw to be a good UI designer? No, definitely not. I would say like drawing is necessary because in specific companies, you will have people that are illustrators, like graphic illustrators, and then you'll have UI designers. So it really depends on where you go. If you're going to a small sized or small or mid-sized company, I would say, yes, you should know how to draw to be a good UI designer. Because they might ask you to do not only, interface design, which is the buttons and the layout, they might also ask you to do illustrations. But if you're at a large company and the only thing that they're asking you is, if they're not asking you to be able to draw illustrations, and you don't have to. Though I will say a lot of people that are pursuing UI are either, art students, or they're just really passionate about art themselves. You don't have to know how to like draw with like a pen and paper. Maybe you're good at digital art. Maybe you're good at a different type of art. So just keep that in mind. Don't close doors for yourself. Now, how long did it take for me to transition into UX and get a job? Great question. So I think February of this year is when I quit my consulting job. And then I did my boot camp for February, March, April, May. It was around 3.5 months. And then from May, June, July, I was actually a teaching assistant at that boot camp. And then in July, or the end of July, so a few weeks ago, I got a full-time job. So I would say that's February, March, April, May, June, July. That was 7 months. It took me 7 months to transition into UX and to actually find a job in it. And now we got a little bit more details for what kind of apps I recommend, apps for UX designs for products or sites. Yes, so there is a website called Dribbble. It's like DRIBBB, 3 Bs, LE. And then that, is a website that a lot of people use to kind of see UI designs. It doesn't necessarily have like information as to the UX of those designs, like why are they laid out the way that they are. There's really no information there, but it's kind of a good place to kind of see the designs. Personally, when I'm looking for designs for inspiration, I just Google like home page UX, and then I see what comes up, or search page UX, and I see what comes up. I don't actually use any specific applications for designs. Now we have, as a UX designer, do you need to use HTML or CSS? No, you don't. So, and there is, I think, a few companies that I have applied for, like Shopify, they do request you to know HTML and CSS. However, that is not the case for most places. For most places, you don't really need to have any technical knowledge of any sort. What places might ask you to have is just an understanding of what HTML and CSS is and how it is used. For example, HTML is hypertext markup language, and CSS is used to like make the things on the screen look pretty. Like if you just have kind of a basic understanding, that's really all you need. You definitely don't need to know how to code. And then question, can I recommend sites for design resources? So I definitely can. I will actually post a bunch of links for a bunch of different resources on our Discord channel. I think it is, I forget exactly, it should be like #design. I'll post everything there. There'll be a bunch of different things. And I'll also post a link to my portfolio. That's where you can find this PowerPoint presentation in case anyone's interested. Again, as I mentioned, it has some links within the presentation, might be useful for anyone here. And I just got another question. What are some ways we can get or make case studies? That's a great question. So case studies can really be anything. So as an example, you can create a case study out of the hackathon this weekend. What you'd basically go through in your case study is, what is the UX process that you used in 48 hours, or how much ever time it is, to get your final product. So what kind of research did you do? How did you ideate? How did you define? Like, how did you prototype? If you go through all of those steps in your case study, you have a case study. So again, it can be hackathons. It can also be personal projects. So let's say you're really passionate about something like the music industry or the skincare industry or something like that, and you think that there's a gap in the current industry. You can create some sort of digital product that would help to fill that gap. you can go ahead and like do it as a personal project. And people love seeing personal projects in the sense that, you know, it shows that you're passionate about UX and you're passionate about, you know, trying to create things. So I lost my train of thought. Oh, yes. So that's personal projects. What people also do are like design changes to already large companies, for example, like Starbucks or Tim Hortons or, you know, the Bay, whatever. Like if you use like a application of theirs and you realize there's something a little wonky with it, you think it would go better if something is a little different, the layout's different, the UI is different, if the UX of the pages are different, then you can go ahead and redesign it. That's pretty strong because you're working within brand guidelines that are already established and you're, you know, changing that to make it work better and fill a gap that you've identified. And then of course, there's like school projects. If you decide to go to a boot camp, college, or university, those are also things that you can put in there. Lastly, the things that you can throw in there are any freelance jobs that you've done or any things you've done for people for free. So as I was mentioning before, there's a mom and pop coffee shop. They have a website. It's really bad. You look at it and you're like, I can fix this by applying my, you know, UX UI principles and making it look better. You actually help them. You do make it look better. You can add that as a case study on your portfolio, even if they didn't pay you any money, because you actually worked with a person to make something better. All you have to do is go through your process in your case study and it's real. So it can really come from anywhere. Then a question is, can I talk about a recent UI project that I worked on? So I'll be real with you. My specialty is that it's not UI. My specialty is actually user experience research. So it's kind of on the completely other side of the spectrum. I mainly have done user experience research and then a little bit of like the ideation and wireframing. For my bootcamp, I did do a complete kind of full stack project where I did all the way from research to creating the UI and the interface, but it wasn't just a specific UI project. Now, what I did do or focus on UI is when I was doing freelancing for a little bit, it was basically a bit of a UI gig because I was just looking at other people's UI and I was commenting on what could be done better. Like, you know, your buttons are too close together or they're both the same color, but they do different things. Or, you know, your screen is too large or your text is too small. So that's kind of the stuff that I've worked on in the past, but nothing where I'm, you know, just working on the UI for a specific product that I have created, just because that isn't something that I'm interested in nor good at. But again, if you want to take a look, I have a case study up on my website. I'll link that in Discord. And it has like a full process of how I created that like full stack project. And so you can see the UI steps that I took to basically to create that. And the last question here, most important softwares for designers to know to get jobs. Okay, there are actually a few, and I actually don't know all of them myself, but I know these are important to get jobs. The first one I would say is Figma for sure. And if you don't know Figma, I would suggest that you know Sketch or Adobe XD. They're both similar software. So all three of these kind of do the same thing, but Figma is really, you know, gaining ahead in the industry these days. So definitely know very well how to use Figma. Then I would actually suggest learning this new thing called Webflow. They're basically like a website creation software, but you don't have to code at all. It's like more drag and drop. You can code if you want to provide different functionalities, but so many people are looking for someone, especially smaller companies, who knows how to use Webflow. So again, I'll post all of these things in the Discord afterwards, but like Webflow, super important. Look it up. They have like a full set of videos that you can learn how to do things. So I would say that is really beneficial. Apart from Figma and Webflow, I actually don't use any other softwares. Some people do Photoshop if they're UI designers or graphic illustrators, but for the most part in UX, not really. Like you probably should know how to use a Microsoft suite like Excel and PowerPoint. But past that, you probably don't need anything else that you don't already know. All right, so I think that is the end of questions. Thank you everyone for asking so many questions. If you have more, honestly, put it in the Discord and I will answer as best as possible. And as I said before, I will include some sort of a resource list there just for like a bunch of different things that might be useful. If you guys want more resources, I can definitely provide them. Just again, ask in the Discord. It should be #design. And yeah, that's it. thank you everyone for listening.